Buonasera a tutti, bentrovati. Passo alla lingua inglese per dare il benvenuto ufficiale ad Anijo Mathew. So I'm switching in English. Welcome, Anijo, at this club event of the Observatory of Design Thinking. I'm very happy and glad to have you here. So Anijo is a Dean of the Institute of Design of Chicago at Illinois Tech, and he is also a professor. I'm very happy to have him here today, since after a few conversation and cooperation with him, we realized that we have similar but not equal perspective on the complexity in approaching design-driven innovation, and moreover, entering into complex system-like organization and nurturing a change starting from a design perspective. I don't want to steal too much time from his speech, so just welcoming him, and the speech is going to be hopefully very inspiring for all of you. It is for me. And Anijo is going to share with us his experience, not only as an academic, but also as a professional, and his specific view on how now we can intervene inside the organizational realm in front of significant change in terms of adoption of specific technology. So Anijo, again, welcome. Can you hear us? You can jump in. And for all the audience, please do not hesitate to post some questions into the toAdapt website. Hello, Anijo. Stage is yours.
Hello, Michele. Thank you, Stefano. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Can you also see my screen? Yes,
yes.
Great. So I will get started. So before I get started, I have a gentle request. I know all of you are, it's very late in the evening for you and you're probably tired from work, but it would be very nice if I could see your faces. So if at least a few of you could switch on your cameras, that'll be very helpful. Because at least then I can see your reactions as I make the presentation, and I can also prompt questions. Thank you so much for doing this and joining me and inviting me today. So as Michele and Stefano described, I am the Dean of the Institute of Design in Chicago. Some of you may have heard about us, but I'll describe this in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. Just a little bit of my background. I am an architect by training. I have a design degree from Harvard. And during the time that I was in Boston, I spent a lot of my time at the Media Lab doing some of my time at the Media Lab doing research. And my PhD is in computing. So a lot of my work tends to be in connecting technologies with human-centered innovation. And this is a big part of my research and big part of my consulting work at the Institute of Design. So I work primarily with organizations in Asia, and the first two organizations are big Asian multinational companies that I helped build their innovation platform. And the third one, it doesn't exist anymore, but we actually build 4 innovation hubs for them globally. So a lot of the work that we do here at ID and my personal work is in building these platforms. I'm also an entrepreneur. I founded a company in 2014. The company doesn't exist right now because of the pandemic. It was a tourism company. Not a great look when you're in the middle of a pandemic to have a tourism company. But we raised $4 billion for it. I had a team of about 15 people for 7 years. We were valued at $20 million before we had to close down because of the pandemic. So I have some entrepreneurship experience and also building teams experience. So today I want to talk, Michele asked me to talk a little bit about what descending technologies mean for organizations. And I'm assuming there's quite a few people here. I'm assuming you're here because you're also interested in this topic, right? Like this idea of, there's all these things that are popping up, AI, robotics, XR, things that are sort of on the horizon, but we're not familiar with. So how can organizations build strategies to adapt to this? So I'm going to go through this presentation in some sequence, and then we can have questions at the end. So if you can note your questions down for a conversation at the end, that'll be helpful. As I described, let me just explain to you what Institute of Design is. We are part of a large university that was established in 1930, so not as old as some of the universities in Italy, but pretty old in terms of US standards. We are part of Illinois Institute of Technology. But our claim to fame comes from the fact that some of you may recognize the building on the left is the Bauhaus, which is the most influential school of design in the world. And the person on the right is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. And the Institute of Design was founded as a new Bauhaus in the US. So this was the US's response to transforming needs of the factory floor, the industry during the Industrial Revolution. So this was in 1937. And so we are 87 years old this year. So a lot of history there. And one of the things that we are known for is the curriculum wheel that led to several of many design schools around the world use this curriculum wheel as the foundation of their design curriculum. Of course, it's evolved many times over since 1937 with this idea that you start with a foundational degree and work up towards a master's degree. It comes from the Bauhaus and the new Bauhaus in Chicago. Today, this is where we are. This is a $40 million investment by our university into design and innovation. That's our beautiful new building. It's in the middle of Chicago, so we are in town. Michele has been here and has been in this building, so he's familiar with what it feels like. It's very cold today. It's -4 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is -15 degrees Celsius. I don't think you want to be in Chicago now, but in the summer, as you can see, it's beautiful here. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a conversation. Michele warned me that this is an expert group. I don't have to tell you what design is, but I'm always triggered by this, right? Like, so let me ask you a quick question. You don't have to answer, it's rhetorical. What is design, right? Like many people, when they think about design, they think about beautiful objects. And the best example of a company that has incorporated design into their business strategy is Apple, right? Like, so Johnny Ives. And so a lot of the people that I talk to want to become like Johnny Ives, right? So, but over the many years of our existence at the Institute of Design, we have a different perspective on design. So one big perspective is this idea called the innovation gap. So the easiest way to explain this gap, and some of you may have already seen this, like Michele and Stefano described, a lot of our work has similarities. So you may have seen versions of this out there, but this is one that our former dean used to talk about, which is this idea that since the Industrial Revolution, organizations and companies have figured out how to make something, right? Like, so if, for example, I see there are people here from many companies. So if whatever your core competency is, let's say you make cars, right? Or you make parts for cars, or we work very closely with Ferrero, which is a chocolate company. So if we ask Ferrero, how do you make something out of chocolate? They are very good at answering that question, right? So that how to make question has been really good and emphasized in organizations. At the same time that we got very good at making things, we also lost touch with the user that we make things for. And so this is what we call the innovation gap. That difference between how to make something and what to make is what we call the innovation gap. Now, we believe that design is the role of design is to reduce that gap. So unlike many other design schools where a lot of the focus is on making things, we are much more interested in reducing this disconnect between how to make and what to make. So that means that a lot of our work is in strategy, organizational processes, or innovation platforms, new product development, things like that. I want you to keep the word innovation gap in mind because I'm going to return to it in a second. And just remember, this version of innovation gap is the difference between how to make and what to make. And in the 1990s, we joined a lot of the work that we used, that we pioneered two things, right? Like we're famous for two things. One is systems design. We were one of the first design schools in the world to argue that uh, design should be a systems-based approach, right? It can't be a product-based approach. If you're making a bottle like this, oh, you can't see my bottle because of the screen, but let's say, imagine a water bottle, plastic water bottle. You can't just design the shape and form of the bottle. You have to design the entire system, where you get the materials from, how does that material move from the raw material into factory, all of that has to be designed. So that's one contribution. The second contribution is what we call human-centered design, this idea that organizations need to move from technology-centered strategy to human-centered strategy. And of course, one of the first projects that we worked on was with a small consultancy firm at that time called IDEO. And I'm sure all of you know IDEO because of your association with this organization here. And this was one of the first recorded projects in which human-centered design was applied. It's a project for Amoco, which is a petrol station in the US. And IDEO and ID worked together on drafting this framework, which is the what we call the Balanced Breakthrough Framework. Some people call it DVF. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. It means that it suggests that innovation exists at the intersection of desirability, viability, and feasibility. So then IDEO went on. They were a small consultancy. Then they worked with ID alums to expand on this idea of human-centered design, popularized it as design thinking, which all of you are familiar with because you're part of this collaborative here with Polyme, right? So in some sense, you can trace design thinking's roots back to Chicago and the Institute of Design. So that's a claim to fame there. However, now we are arguing that it's time to move on from design thinking, which is a very ironic thing to say to a group who came together to talk about design thinking, right? So what does that mean when we say it's time to move on from design thinking? One of the things that we refer is this idea that maybe it's time for design itself to have three different, a reframe, right? Like we've scholars like Stefano, Michele, myself, my faculty, we work at the intersection of design and business, right? And so we are very integrated into that idea that business needs design to sort of transform, and business sometimes recognizes that. And what the result of that is that many organizations, including Harvard, educational systems like Harvard and business schools, even the GSOM at Polyme teaches design thinking as part of that curriculum. What is the design role then? So three reframes. So the first one is we believe that it's time for us to move to networks and organizations as the object of design, right? And so I'm calling on a major scholar in design, Richard Buchanan, who was a former director of the Carnegie Mellon School of Design. And he argues that there are four frames of design, right? Like, so the first frame was graphic design, then industrial design and interaction design, and all of these four orders of design. And all of these, if you look at it from one perspective, are object-based design. We are making something that exists as an artifact in an organization. And then IDEO came into picture, design thinking became popular. That's process-based innovation. Now what we are arguing, it's time for us to move to networks and organizations as the object of design. Like, the artifact that we are designing is not graphic design or a product or an interaction or even process, but the entire organization itself, right? And this is very complicated because this is no longer the realm of object design, it's the realm of systems design. So that's the first reframe. But why now? Well, you're all familiar with this. I don't have to tell you this, but here are some statistics, right? IBM says 40% of the workforce is going to be reskilled. Goldman Sachs suggests that 300 jobs are going to be replaced in the near future, 300 million jobs. 30% of all work hours is going to look different by 2030, right? And finally, Aon, which is a big HR company, argues that 69% of the headcounts are at risk of disruption from AI. This means that entire organizations are going to be redesigned in the age of AI. So that's the first reframe, right? Keep that in mind. The second reframe is that there is a need, and many organizations are now coming to us and saying, look, we have been so focused on shareholder capitalism as a driver of our innovation that we need to rethink that. Now, the reason for this, and especially in Asian organizations that have existed for many centuries, have built their entire narrative on stakeholders. And then Milton Friedman economics suggests that shareholders are the reason why corporations exist, right? So this becomes a direct conflict for these organizations. And so one of our researchers, Veslin Ashton, and her PhD student suggests that most organizations look at the world from two capital lenses, right? Financial capital and social capital. But there are more than that. And they argue there are 8 capitals. Now, there are different organizations that talk about this differently. Researchers at Polyme and toAdapt have argued that there are more than 8 capitals, but we focus on 8, right? And if you divide those 8 up, you can see that there are 3 that focus on shareholder value and 5 that focus on stakeholder value. And the difference between the two is that shareholder value innovation that is driven by shareholder value needs to be fast and agile, and it has the gestation periods for that innovation platforms are about 3 to 5 years, basically the tenure of a CEO. A CEO will come, they'll say something, and then they will go, right? And that's the gestation period of that innovation. Stakeholder value is deeper, it's multi-generational, it lasts longer. And many traditional companies, legacy companies, will say that organizational value is more important than shareholder value, right? Like this idea that we want to build the trust that they have established exists over multiple generations of users, not just one generation of users. This means that we need a whole new perspective. Now, you remember I told you to focus on the word innovation gap. I am arguing that this is the new innovation gap. Organizations have figured out how to reduce the gap between how to make and what to make. Now, the big question is, how can they reduce the gap between shareholder value and stakeholder value? So this leads to the second reframe, which we call stakeholder capitalism. The third and so why now? Because organizations are faced with major issues, right? Like sort of civic infrastructures or healthcare or food or data or climate change. These are multi-generation values that we talk about. Persistence of, we call them persistent areas of concern. If you design a product, like let's say, going with the example of Ferrero, let's say you design a really good chocolate product, it lasts with maybe 1 or 2 generations of users, right? But if you can change the way the factory works in terms of food procurement, food waste, that creates multi-generational value, right? So that's the real reason why we need stakeholder capitalism. The third thing that we talk about at the Institute of Design is if we are to focus on organizational redesign, if we are to focus on stakeholder design, then we need a whole new type of leader. The leaders that are leading these companies are not necessarily educated in this sort of long-term thinking, in sort of this idea of organizational redesign and framing, right? Like they're taught to come in and make decisions based on existing analytical processes, right? Like many of you, if you went to business schools, that's what is taught. So this whole paradigm shift of moving from process innovation to organizational redesign requires new leadership. So I have been talking to Roger Martin. Some of you may recognize that name. He's the author of this book, Playing to Win, that he wrote with A.G. Lafley, and he argues that there are there's a cascade of choices that leaders have to make. And that top line there are the 5 choices, right? Like what is a winning aspiration, which the CEO makes, where to play, which is usually defined by the strategy team. What are the options defined by the product team? How to win defined by the operation, the engineering team, and how to manage is the operations team, right? Like in each of these cascade of choices, there are certain things that are happening, right? And if you think about this, at the beginning is a divergent process of coming up with why this change is required, called sense making. Then there is a sequence of activities that lead to option making. And finally, there is a convergent activity called decision making. And finally is optimization, right? And this process repeats itself in organization over and over again. I'm sure as managers and leaders, you're going through this process yourself. What Roger Martin suggests is that at the intersection of each of these translations, right, these questions that you ask, are choices. And there are many, many choices that a leader has to go through before they can move to the next level. And when we do that, in order for us to do that, you need to be trained in the process of defining choices, evaluating choices, prototyping choices, thinking of the future, and projecting those choices. And most business people don't know how to do it. Whereas design schools have built their entire curriculum around this idea of choice architecture, right? We not only do we come up with choices, we also come up with the heuristics by which we evaluate those choices. We come up with prototypes, then we do projections, then we go back and check those heuristics and check those prototypes. So it's an entire curriculum that is built around choice making that we have perfected over years. And so as business units start to move into this ascending technology phase, they need this knowledge too. And oftentimes business leaders don't think of designers because in their mind, designers are really good at option making, right? Like if I know I'm going to make a new product, let's bring in the designer to come up with options for those products. Some design leaders like you think about sense making, so which is design thinking. But in reality, the entire spectrum is a series of choices. Even the factory warehouse manager is making choices on optimization. And even that person needs to be trained in terms of choice making, projection mapping, and things like that. So this is the third most important argument or reframe that we have. Why now? If you look at this image, I'm sure you can recognize that object in that image, right? This is, for those of you who don't know, that's Waymo, which is the fastest growing, even though Elon Musk claims that his taxi is the robot taxi is the most impressive innovation. Waymo is the one that's actually on the roads and prototyping and building this, right? But if you look at that image, you'll see Waymo in New York. And when an object exists in this context, there is an incredible amount of choices. There's an incredible amount of policy decisions, an incredible amount of transactions that have to be made that go beyond the actual product itself. So leaders like yourself have to need that sort of capability to interface with the different organizations and different partners to make those choices happen. The last time we saw an amazing array of technologies come together is in the 1990s with the coming together of the mobile phone, the internet, and the computer. And when that happened, this is what resulted, right? These are trillion-dollar industries that came out of that intersection. Today, we are faced with a new type of transformation. We are seeing the emergence of AI, a lot of conversation on AI, but don't forget robotics is just right behind, and XR, extended reality, AR and MR are coming into the picture. These things don't exist together yet. Which company, which organization is going to bring those things together? Which organization is to come up with strategies around that, right? Like, so that is where the excitement of the future lies for us. So when we consult, that's what we talk about, is the coming together of this trifecta, and how can companies, even legacy companies, make make in design a choice architecture in their organization so that they can come up with the right choices to move into the spectrum. So with those three reframes, I also wanted to share three frameworks that you can use to think about how to move into this new space, right? So these three frameworks are, I've been working with Jim Hackett, who is the former CEO of Ford and Steelcase, to define these three frameworks. Now, Jim Hackett is really important to this group because he's the one who first recognized that IDEO is an important organization and actually bought IDEO and put it inside Steelcase a long time before any organization even heard of the word design thinking. So Jim Hackett is a visionary. And so he and I have a 3F framework for design leaders who are interested in developing a strategy around ascending technologies. The framework is quite simple, but I'll explain it quickly. Fitness, futures, and friction. Now, you have our colleagues at Polyme are experts in futures, so I'm sure you've heard of that part of the framework. But let me explain the whole thing so you can understand. So, what is fitness? In evolutionary biology, there is an argument that organisms that are fit are the ones that are able to create offsprings that allow that organism to survive over time. And the reason why that organism survives over time is because it has adaptations that allow it to adapt to context differently from other organisms. So organisms with lower fitness tend to die out, and organisms with higher fitness tend to survive. Now, if you take that and take that idea and connect it to an organization, your organization, what are the adaptations that you have built over the time of your existence that allow you to incorporate ascending technologies into your context, right? So that's the big question you have to ask. So how can we map that? And of course, all of this takes a long time to explain, but quickly, one way that we do this is what we call an era map. An era map maps transformations in technology over time, transformations in social, political context over time. And one of the big things that we do with organizations is we map this out, and then we ask leaders to say, how did you adapt to that change in the past? What were the new innovations that you did in response to, let's say, this is about education. This is a project we did with an educational partner. So what are the things that you did to adapt to television? What are the things that you did to adapt to centralized computing, distributed computing? That allows us to see what adaptations, abilities the organization has to adapt new technologies. The next F that you need to think about is futures. Once you know how your organization is capable, you can make a projection into the future, right? And I'm sure you've seen a version of this. Like I said, our colleagues at Polyme are very good at this. So this idea that there are preferable futures, and the role of an organizational leader is to find a trajectory from today to the future that is as close to a preferable future as possible, right? Now, one of the ways that we talk about this at ID that is a little different from Polyme is that the past has a lot to play in how you move into the future. So as much as you might think about the future, you also need to think about the past. Like, remember the adaptations that your organization has built over time? That then gives you an understanding of where you are and how far into the future you can project. So what we do is on the right-hand side, you will see there is a slice that we cut in the futures code that we call a speculation. So we work with business leaders, usually chair people or CEOs, to say, 20 years into the future, what does your organization look like? right? What are the adaptations that you have made over time to get there? And then once you have defined that future, you can work backwards to now and say, this is a process called backcasting, where you can say, what are the steps required to get to those new adaptations that you need to make? And once you have done all of this, and you can say, this is great, right? Like now we have adaptations, now we know what the future looks like, and we are ready to go. Well, actually not. Most organizations encounter what we call friction, because what happens in organizations is no matter how good your vision is, how good your strategy is, there's always hurdles that you face. And most organizations think of innovation as a problem of ideas. And you are business leaders. You know when I say this, ideas is not a problem in any organization. Every organization, every business leader has great ideas. The problem is, how does that idea flow through your system and your network? Where does that idea move from a creative phase into an implementation phase? And in many organizations, this is the problem. There are, like, we built a platform for this multinational company in India. Everybody at the top end acknowledged it, but the middle managers killed it because it did not work with their uh, quarterly P&L system, right? So these are what we call implementation barriers. One of our faculty members who has a consulting company called Code Lab argues that innovation is not a problem of ideas, innovation is a problem of flow. It's the flow of ideas through the system that you need to define. And what she argues is that all organizations have three problems. There are bumps, that is an issue that is in the organizational structure that slows something down. And there are barricades that stop something. And most importantly, there are blind spots. There are things that you are not able to see until you put something into action. And so she has an entire workshop that she has built around helping organizations redefine what their understand what the bumps, barricades, and blind spots are, and then come up with strategies on how to sort of suppress some of these things and allow that innovation. Like, let's say one of you you guys come up with a great idea. How does that idea flow through the system down into the hands of the user or the partner that you want to use it? So those are the three reframes. Those are the three reframes and the frameworks. So the three big reframes are institutions, organizations as the object of design, um, stakeholder design, and design leadership. And the three frameworks are uh, uh, fitness, futures, and friction, right? So with that, I'm going to end the presentation. Just a quick pitch of what we do here. We are completely graduate only. We are a much smaller school than Politecnico di Milano, all graduate and all leadership oriented. We are one of the only schools in the US and I think around the world where you can get 2 degrees in 2 years. So you get an MDes MBA or an MDes MPA, public administration degree. And two of our degrees, even a PhD program, is focused on working professionals. And I invite all of you to come to Chicago this May. So on May 29th and 30th, we have a major summit that we are putting together that focuses on AI across the globe. So we had 4 global conversations in New Zealand, Tokyo, India, and New Zealand, Japan, India, and the US. All of them come to Chicago in May 29th and 30th. I'm happy to send that information over to this group. I'd love to see you all at ID. So this is a little glimpse of what you will see when you get to ID. Thank you so much. Michaela, that was perfect, huh? 30 minutes.
More than perfect. Very in time. Thank you very much, Anijo. First of all, for the density of content that you share with all the community. It was very interesting, at least from my side, but I think also from the side of the 100 person that is listening to you. We collect questions via Paul have platform. Sorry. So I'm gonna go with the top voted question for starting, for icebreaking this question and answer session. So I think most of the people in the room were impressed by your emphasizing on being used to making choices as designers. So the first question is, how can design practices support business leaders in managing choices? And if you can, and if you may provide a practical example on that.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with Roger Martin's strategy cascade. Is everybody familiar? Have you heard of this before, the strategy cascade? So it's a series of questions. I have abstracted it in this slide, but it doesn't look like this in Roger's perspective. It looks like a set of rectangles that you move through. Now, if you remember, I said that at the intersection of each of these questions is a set of choices, right? Now, how can a business leader build that architecture into the company? Well, the first thing that you need to think about is acknowledging that it is a series of choices. If you are a business leader, you're most likely educated in a case study method or an analytical process method where you've been told that data will give you the answer. And data can give you an answer if the gestation period is 3 to 5 years. But data will not give you the answer if the gestation period is 20 years, which means the impact horizon is 20 years out, right? So you need to make some projections. First thing is acknowledging that there are choices to be made. The second thing is building processes by which those choices are then incorporated into the working of the organization. So, two examples. One is Godrej, where we built the innovation platform in India. We actually set up nodal access points down to people in the factory floors so that the factory floor people can start to put knowledge into this nodal system that flows up to the chairman's office. So the questions were being asked by people all the way down in the factory floor, right? This allows people to say, here are the choices I have to make. Can you help me make these choices? All the way down, not just the people in the C-suite, but all the way down to the factory floor. The second example is of McMaster-Carr, which is a big supply chain company in the US, where they built a wiki that captures knowledge from everyone from the owner of the company to a person in the field. And that wiki allows this knowledge not only to be captured, but also to be translated. So and then there is a group of people in that company who pays attention to new knowledge that is created that is then pushed up into the organizational leadership to say, these are the things that we need to think about. So building a system that enables these choices to be made. The third thing is building a system, a platform where choices can be prototyped, because every choice is not an answer. And very often you will have senior leaders come into a boardroom and say, I am going to do this. I have the answer to the problem. And you want to get to a point where senior leaders are saying, I don't know the answer, but I have the methods by which I can get to that answer, right? So that's a third thing. And the fourth and the final thing is to set up a stage gate process, which we do with organizations, where there is a way for ideas to flow through the system all the way down, and there is a way for the ideas to flow backwards also. So those are the four things that I would say in terms of building choice architectures.
Thank you, Anijo. I hope that it was enough for the one that wrote the question. You can also jump into the conversation, opening your mic and build on that. In the meanwhile, I want to, there is one question which is very interesting to me, and it comes kind of at the very beginning of your speech, which is related to how is it possible to design digital solution that can be like multi-generational, as you mentioned, intergenerational,
Right. Yeah.
in a world in which technology become obsolete so fast.
Yeah, this is a really good question and something that I'll be honest that we are still trying to figure out, right? Like it's a complex problem because of generational changes that are happening in technology itself. So this is no one answer to this problem. The way I think about this that is different from most organizations is I argue that designers are not architects of technology, that we are not there to talk about the technology itself. We are there to talk about how the technology touches the human experience, right? And then the architecture that we built, the design solution that we built is about that interface between the technology and the human experience. What that translates into is what do your users want? Like, what is it that your users try to achieve by doing this, right? Now, once you have that question answered, and once you have insight into that question, then you can port technology on top of that and say, in the current version of the technology, this is how we are going to answer that question, and then make projections or speculations using futures thinking to say, in the future, based on research that's happening at MIT or engineering schools in Italy or in Germany or wherever, here's where we see the technology going. If that happens, here's how we'll answer that question then, right? So it's a little bit of turning it upside down. And the other big thing to keep in mind in this whole process as you go through it, like one is don't romance the technology, romance the user need, is also the fact that if you put users at the front of your conversation, right? Remember that not all solutions can be user driven. I know we are very much a human-centered design school, but we also argue that not all solutions can be user-driven. Some solutions are technology-driven. A perfect example of this is Henry Ford, who designed a car that users couldn't even think about, or Steve Jobs, who designed a device that was not a phone, not an internet device, not a music player, but users couldn't think that, right? And the second thing is system design. Like you can, like when cities develop solutions, they're not thinking of users, or they're not only thinking of users or technology, they're thinking of long-term value, right? So for example, if you're designing the metro system for a city, you're not just thinking of the user or the technology, you're thinking of a system that exists for a long time. So human-centered, user-centered design is one, like putting the needs of the user. The other thing might be putting the needs of the technology first. The other is putting the needs of the system or the network first. So between these three, you can start to answer that question. The problem is with technology moving so fast, it's very difficult to touch down and say, this is what the solution is. And so it's a lot of prototyping, a lot of testing, a lot of generational technologies that you incorporate into this.
Thank you, Anijo. It sounds very make me reflect a lot, but I want to make the very last question before moving to the second part of our event, if you don't mind, because I think it's very important for us and for the community here. So regarding the friction, so the third part of the framework, what can designers in general, design practitioners do to facilitate, to overcome friction, specifically in a whole mindset organization that don't properly see the values of design as a core capability? I think it's a recurring topic here in Italy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the problem of the design field, and us included, and I'm sure our colleagues at Polyme are responsible for this also, is that we have suggested that only designers can solve these problems, right? Like only designers can come in and help solve this problem. We are now arguing, and that we have started to argue, especially by a colleague who runs this company, argues that in the organizations are people with design ability who are not necessarily designers. And we call them catalysts, right? Like this scholar Shopi Kumar calls it a catalyst, an innovation catalyst. And these people exist in the organizations. They already think in terms of choice making, prototyping, futuring, but they're stuck because they are in an organizational structure that doesn't elevate them. So one of the things that we are now saying is maybe the solution isn't to send someone to design school to do a complete degree, which you need. And I'm not saying you don't need those people, but maybe there are ways that you can elevate these people who already think like designers to solve these problems, right? So that might be a middle manager. So you identify a bump is the middle managers are unable to move the idea forward because of quarterly P&L. Within those middle managers, you can identify an individual or group of individuals who you might say are catalysts, and then train them to think like a designer, to prototype like a designer, and then implement those solutions within that group. So you're not coming in as an outsider and telling them what to do. They are telling their group that, hey, we can think like this. So this is what we call a catalytic reaction rather than an input reaction, like a designer coming and solving the problem. We work with the organization to identify those people and elevate them.